We left off discussing after we step out of the audience, we make a supplication and we say, it should be the will before you, the omnipotent, almighty, the God of our forefathers. The temple should be built speedily in our days. So we discussed this yesterday. Why do we talk about the immediacy? The immediacy of the building of the temple. After Mashiach comes, the world will be purged of all evil. God's glory will be restored. However, the temple, the Beis Hamikdash, is an essential part of that glory being reinstated, being fully restored. Because the temple represents God's domicile is no longer only in heaven, but rather it's with mankind. It's on the terrestrial level. So we ask speedily, God is pained that we're not worthy of the relationship. And I explained the allegory of the Chofetz Chaim. The king is ready always to re-enter into relationship. The wife has to be ready to reconnect with the husband. God is ready to bring the redemption immediately. The problem is we're not ready for the redemption. We're not at a level that we're worthy. Once we meet that criteria, which allows us to be considered worthy, God is there immediately. So therefore, and we understand that until the temple, the Beis Hamikdash is rebuilt, God is not in a place where he wants to be, because that was not the original intention of creation. So because we feel God's pain, as we say, kavayocho, in terms of the objective, we want it to happen quickly, soon, speedily. There's no word to use to speak about the immediacy of bringing that about. The Seichel Kedem, we're asking, make a double request here. Rebuild the temple immediately and allow us to have our portion in your Torah. What's Chelkenu? Give us our portion in your Torah. That we discussed, the Talmud tells us that one's yearly stipend is decided on Rosh Hashanah for the full year till the following Rosh Hashanah. Meaning you will not make more, you will not make less. That's what's meant to be yours. However, we have to take certain initiatives to be able to extract or to collect what was designated for us. Because if you receive what you're meant to receive and what God wants you to have, you should sit back, do nothing. And as we say, wait for the check to come in the mail. It doesn't happen that way. We have to take initiative. What level of initiative do you have to take? So I gave an example. A person has a nest egg in Australia in a vault, and you live in the United States, and it's waiting for you to take, except you're not able to go to Australia to open the vault to take it out. But it's there for you. So you make inquiries how to give it delivered from there to the United States. And you call up the president of the bank or the Federal Reserve of Australia that they should deliver your so-called nest egg to your front step, to your front door. So they say, you know something? Not a problem. We'll deliver it. But the delivery fee may be as costly as whatever that nest egg is worth. But it's my money. They said, we're not withholding it. You're welcome to come and take it. But when I come and take it, it's going to take me 6 months to get there. And 6 months back, I got to invest a full year of my life to get the yearly stipend. They said, look, but that's the reality. But if you would have certain clout with the government, we could put it on a government transport. We could get it to you in 24 hours, but you don't have the clout. You don't have those connections to the government because you've never contributed to the Australian government. But if you would, immediately the prime minister gives the order, within 24 hours, DHL, it's delivered at your doorstep. You just have to put the signature. But you don't have it. God says everybody's nest egg is there waiting, except you have to take initiative to extract it. What is the criteria that you have to meet? As we discussed, as the name of the Ramchal, when Adam ate of the tree of knowledge, the curse to Adam was, you shall eat bread by the sweat of your brow. You have to meet the precondition of the bread comes due to your toil, which is equivalent to the sweat of your brow. Then you'll get what you're supposed to have. That's called taking initiative. Okay, so let's talk about the tzaddik. Person devoutly righteous. He has his share. He has his allocation. Now, the question is, the only way he's able to extract his allocation is how? He has to interrupt his Torah study, interrupt his prayer, to be invested in extracting and retrieving what's rightfully his. God says, you know something, but that allocation was only there for you to facilitate what you're supposed to be doing, what's primary, which is the study of Torah and doing mitzvahs and praying to God. You know something? Therefore, the smallest degree of distraction for that purpose, that's eating bread by the sweat of your brow for the person's the tzaddik. Picking up the phone, waiting online for 5 minutes to connect with the long distance operator when they had long distance operators. And, Australia, they speak English. Also, they speak Aborigines, Remember Gula Gang, whatever she was, the tennis pro from Australia, right? So you don't even have to speak Aborigines today. You have programmed in the phone, whatever language, immediately it interprets it into that language. The tzaddik, Hashem says, God says, I don't want you to waste a moment. So for you even to lift the phone for 5 minutes to interrupt your Torah study, for you, that's the sweat of your brow. You're pained. God says, you know something? I will deliver it myself. Straight to your doorstep, no delivery charge, that you'd be able to utilize it immediately. Now you have another person. He spends 8 hours a day on the golf green. He shoots the breeze. He's in competition with nature. There's breeze in nature, and he shoots the breeze also. He's in competition with God. The breeze and the breeze. God says, you know something? Here I endow you with a life to invest it, to be productive and creative at a phenomenal level. And you're investing it in horses, the racetrack, yachting, and all that. If you have time for that, you go to Australia. You pick it up yourself. I'm not your lackey. I'm not your golf boy where I carry a golf bag. I'm not your caddy. You understand it? The tzaddik, God says, what do you mean? You're my man. You're my executive officer. You generate the profits. That's how we deal in the physical plane. Let's talk in the spiritual plane. The Talmud tells us that when a child is in utero, an angel is sent by God and he teaches the child the Torah's entirety. The child in utero has a spiritual status, although it's a soul in the body, but that child, that fetus, is not subject to the evil inclination. And therefore, the Talmud tells us it's the equivalent. There's a light that burns over his head, and the child in utero is able to see from one end of the world to the other. There's no obstructions. He has absolute clarity. And the angel teaches him the Torah's entirety. And before the child is born, the angel adjures the child that he should be committed to fulfill everything that he was taught. And then the child's about to be born. The angel puts his hand on the mouth of the child. The child forgets everything, and the child is born. So what is the spiritual potential of the child? It's based upon the level of Torah knowledge which the angel infused within the soul of that child. What is life's responsibility? To extract all that knowledge that was taught by that angel to that child in utero. At Sinai, every Jewish soul was at Sinai when God gave the Torah to Jewish people. Every soul received its allocation of Torah. The angel, when he teaches that child the Torah in utero, it's that portion that's rightfully his from Sinai. That is the portion the angel teaches that child. Now the question is, the portion is enormous, but do we achieve it? Are we successful that we're able to extract it fully? That's what's embedded in our soul. It's not called subconscious. It's embedded in our soul, and we're able to activate it, that if we take certain initiatives, it's like recall. It's what we call siyata d'shmaya. If you make sufficient strides and efforts and sacrifice for it, God will release that information that you're going to come upon your portion. But for that, you need divine assistance because we're physical beings. So we ask God, give us our portion, our rightful portion, because most people don't come upon that portion. Because we're not sufficiently committed. We don't toil sufficiently. That God should release that information, that it should enter into our minds and come upon those truths. You have to be worthy. So we pray to God. The Beis Hamikdash should be built speedily in our time. God's glory should be restored. Not only the evil should be expunged from existence, but the temple, God's location on terrestrial level, should be in place to have the relationship with mankind, specifically with the Jewish people. All mankind should sing God's praises and submit themselves to God as the king. And Mashiach is God's representation in this world. It's called Melech Mashiach. Mashiach means he's the anointed one. He's anointed to be the redeemer of the world. And what happens in that setting? And now the world is a spiritual setting. Now there's less blockage. There's less distraction. So in that state of being less distracted, despite our unworthiness because of our checkered past, we ask God, now that we're so connected to this purity of existence, which is God's presence, allow us to retrieve our portion. That's what we're asking for. So it's interesting. You have your material allocation, you have your spiritual allocation. The material allocations every year, determined on Rosh Hashanah. Your spiritual allocation was determined at Sinai when our souls were there, when God gave the Torah to the Jewish people. That was our allocation of spirituality. That allocation is taught to the child in utero before he's born. Life's objective is to strive and toil to extract that, to retrieve that. But you need toil. Without toil, it doesn't happen. You have the material allocation. Without toil, it doesn't happen. You cannot retrieve it. You have to meet the prerequisite of toil. As our spirituality, you have to meet the prerequisite of toil. There also you have to toil. But at the end of time, where all evil will be removed and the world will be pure, that toil is no longer necessary. The truth is available. It's obvious because there's no more evil inclination. All the cataracts have been peeled off the eye. The eye is fully functional. It sees with absolute clarity. So we're asking, because we can only achieve the heights of spirituality is only through the Torah, and then we could really solidify our relation with God. And that's what we have. It's interesting, based on the Talmud, and the Rambam rules this in the laws of Talmud Torah, the study of Torah, that the Rebbe you choose to teach you should have a semblance and the characteristic of a spiritual angel. And it's based on a verse in Malachi, which is one of the prophets, that the teacher you teach, you seek to teach you, the pasuk, the verse says, Sifsei Kohen Yishmu Das, the lips of the Kohen, whose God's efficient represents the religion. Tavakesh Torah bipiu, you should seek Torah from his mouth. Why? Because he is the equivalent of the angel of God. So the Talmud tells us that if the teacher has the characteristics of an angel of God, you seek that teacher. That teacher is the appropriate teacher to teach you Torah. And if he doesn't reflect the characteristics of an angel, that teacher does not qualify as the teacher to teach you Torah. So Marashiva asked the question many years ago, if we would be acquainted with what an angel is and who an angel is, we know what to look for. But how do we know what an angel is? No, you can look high and low, and you could just pass over it. You don't even know you passed over an angel. So what do you mean? You should seek out a teacher who reflects the characteristics of an angel. But what's an angel? And why does he have to be an angel? And if he falls short of an angel, why isn't he the so-called, the one to be able to be the pedagogue, the teacher, to be able to communicate this information to you? Why not? So what I explained was that the Torah we study in our lifetime, who was the original teacher who embedded and infused that Torah into our souls? It was an angel. So because that Torah was infused into our souls and the characteristic of that teacher was angel, the only one who's qualified to extract that Torah, he must also reflect the characteristics of that teacher, who's the angel. Now we're going to speak, but what's an angel? None of us, we've never met an angel. Well, she's like an angel. There are all kinds of angels, Which angel? We're talking about a holy angel, a spiritual angel, which represents everything positive. What is that? So the answer is, what does the angel say to the child after he teaches him the Torah's entirety? His portion that he had received at Sinai. He says to the child, all that I've taught you, it should not be abstract intellectualism. It's limud amnas lasos. You study it with the objective to actualize it fully and to disseminate it. That is what the angel says to this unborn child, says to the spiritual being in utero before it's been impacted negatively by the evil inclination. The evil inclination only comes upon the child once the child comes into this existence. And he adjures the child and binds him, that the child takes an oath that he would adhere to what the angel had adjured him. He will study the Torah for the sake of actualization and disseminate it to his best ability. So which teacher do you speak? Do you find? He's articulate, he's a genius. He has a proficiency. It's not enough. If he's there to just lecture and do his thing, he has to take a personal interest that he's disseminating it and impressing it upon the student, that the student understands that this is a way of life. We say. It is our life, it's the length of our days. The heartbeat of the Jew is the Torah, is a spirituality. The teacher who impresses upon the student, that is the message and that is the reality. That teacher reflects the characteristics of the angel. But if he's a teacher who says, look, I'm doing my thing. I deliver my lecture. Otherwise I won't get paid. And it's an ego trip for the teacher, but it's irrelevant to him whether the student succeeds or doesn't succeed. And even if he succeeds, it's only because he wants to have a feather in his cap. That's not the right kind of teacher. Because that teacher will not merit the divine assistance to be able to activate the spiritual system of the child to be able to extract the original Torah that was taught to that child by the angel. Therefore, the teacher you choose has to have a semblance of what an angel is, the characteristics of an angel. That's the understanding. Now, every Shabbos and every Yom Tov, in the Amidah, we make a request, which we don't make this request during the weekday. We say, and this is right before we conclude, Baruch atah Hashem mekadosh HaShabbos, blessed art thou God who sanctifies the Shabbos, the Mekadosh Yisrael v'azmanim, he sanctifies the Jewish people and times. We make a request a few words before the conclusion. We say, Seichel kein b'sorasecha. We ask God to give us our portion in the Torah. But before that, we say, Katshenu b'mitzosecha. Katshenu b'mitzosecha, sanctify us with your mitzvos, v'seichel kein b'sorasecha, and give us a portion in your Torah. What is the linkage between sanctify us with your mitzvos, and as a result of that, we receive our portion in the Torah? What's the linkage? That's firstly. And we're asking God to sanctify us. On the holidays, we say, what happened at Sinai? We became the chosen people. And we articulated the opening blessing of the holiday. We say, Ata v'chartonu b'kol ha'amim. You've chosen us of all nations. And we say, V'kidashtonu mitzvosecha. And when you chose us as your people, you sanctified us with your mitzvos. You gave us the 248 mitzvos to sanctify us. So the sanctification is something of the past. The care of Tolma, and you brought us close to your service. But if we were sanctified already at Sinai, so why every time we say a bracha, a blessing, the text of a bracha which precedes a mitzvah is Asher kiddushanu b'mitzvosav. You've sanctified us with your mitzvos, lo niach tefillin, to put on the tefillin, l'satef b'tzitzis, to wrap ourselves in tzitzis, to eat the matzah, to sit in the sukkah, whatever it is. It's something of the past. Asher kiddushanu b'mitzvosav. It's something of the past. You've sanctified us with the mitzvahs. The mitzvahs were given to us to sanctify us. So if that's the case, why on Shabbos and Yom Tov do we make a special supplication? Katshenu mitzvosecha. Let the mitzvahs sanctify us. And then we receive our portion in Torah. First, what's the linkage? And secondly, firstly, what is this? We're asking God to sanctify us if the mitzvah innately has the ability to sanctify. That's the difficulty. The Talmud tells us that if a person is contaminated, comes in contact with the remains of a rodent, he becomes spiritually contaminated. So what does he have to do? He has to go to a mikvah. Mikvah is a certain body of water, has to meet certain criteria, and he immerses himself fully, submerges himself in the water. When he comes out of the water, because he met all the criteria of what a halachic immersion is, he's released from that contamination. That's what happens. What happens? He's contaminated, and he's walking down the road, he trips, stumbles, he falls head over heels into the body of water, and he's submerged. He never intended to what? To immerse himself. When he comes out of that water, has he been relieved of that contamination? The answer is yes. You know why? Because the Torah says as long as he's submerged in a body of water which meets the criteria of a mikvah, the impurity is released. So the same thing, God gave us the mitzvos at Sinai. You put on your tefillin. The tefillin sanctifies you. That's its value. The tzitzit sanctifies you. Saying the Shema sanctifies you. So if that's the case, if whatever we do the mitzvah, that is the basis for the sanctification, why do we make a request on Shabbos? God sanctifies with your mitzvahs. If this already took place at Sinai, he gave us the mechanism to bring about that sanctification. It's a basic question which I'm asking. And it's a very crucial, fundamental question. How do we understand it? Now, we've said many times, what is the basis for Kedusha, for holiness at that exceptional level? So if you look in the Torah, whatever God is associated with in a certain context, because of God's level of association, that causes sanctity. God is the entity of absolute perfection and completion. If you connect to that source, you assume sanctity, because whatever God is connected to on that special level, that's called holy. Sinai was holy, the mountain, because God descended on the mountain. The moment he ascends, the mountain's a piece of rock. When Moshe witnessed the burning bush, that the bush is burning, but it's not consumed by fire. And Moshe approaches the bush. The angel calls out to Moshe, remove your shoes from your feet. The Admas Kodeshu, because the earth you stand on is hallowed ground. It's holy ground. Why is it holy? Because God's presence is there. So whatever God's presence is associated with, that is the basis for holiness. At Sinai, we became, the Torah tells us, Goy Kadosh. We became a holy nation. How do we become a holy nation? Because God took us as his people. And he says this relationship cannot be terminated under any instance. We're inextricably connected. So because that level of connection, and we're connected to God himself, that's called we became the holy people. Now, why when we do a mitzvah, why does that sanctify us? Why? Seemingly, which it is the understanding, because what is the catalyst which connects us to God? When you do the mitzvah, that allows you to attach yourself to God. God gave us the mitzvahs to spiritualize us, that we should be worthy to attach ourselves to him. So the mitzvah is the means to establish the sanctity, because without the mitzvah, you can't connect to God. That's Asher Kidshanu Mitzvosov. You've sanctified us with your mitzvos, the tzivonu, and you've commanded us to do whatever the mitzvah may be. But the basis for the holiness is through the mitzvah. The mitzvah gives us the worthiness to attach to God. And that attachment is the source of our holiness. That's how we're sanctified through doing the mitzvah. Okay, so let's talk. You do a mitzvah in the most paltry way. It's deficient. It's almost disgraceful. Is that mitzvah going to sanctify you? God says, something. No, thank you. Not interested. If that's the way you do the mitzvah, it's disgraceful. There's no way that's going to link you to me. That's not going to be a means of linkage. So if it doesn't meet the grade, what happens? That mitzvah is not going to make that level of attachment. As a result of that, that mitzvah will not sanctify you. At Sinai, God gave us 248 approaches to create linkage, but you must meet certain criteria that linkage is appropriate and is actualized in a certain level of purity or intent minimally, and through that, it qualifies to attach you to the source, to God himself. And if you're attached, you're holy. Okay? You have a plug, a 3-pronged plug. If you have the plug, there's no prongs on it. You could have the socket, which has an endless energy source. The energy doesn't go into the computer or into the machinery. What are the prongs that connect us to God? These are the prongs. It connects us. God says, I give you mitzvahs to connect you. But the mitzvah has to meet a criteria of being appropriate to bring about that connection. So at Sinai, he gave us the means, but you have to meet certain criteria to that attachment is really in a position to make that connection. So the Rambam writes in the Laws of Tshuva that if a person sins and he fails very seriously, spiritually speaking, Rambam writes, well, how does God look upon that person? He's sonui. He's despised by God. He's v'shukotz. He is disgusting, detestable. Umetuav. God sees him as an abomination. God wants nothing to do with him because of his level of spiritual failing. And when he does a mitzvah, puts on tefillin, this detestable, despised, abominable person, he does a mitzvah. He puts that $100 bill in the charity box, right? You know what God does with that mitzvah? He takes the mitzvah, he shreds it, and throws it back in the person's face. God says, I want nothing to do with you. So as a connection, the connector doesn't qualify to connect. Therefore, there's no kedusha. There's no sanctity. Because the mitzvah is only the catalyst which allows us to connect to the system. But if you're not worthy, God says, he takes that connection and says, don't put it in my socket. Don't put it in my energy source. If he doesn't allow it to enter into the energy source, you're the same nobody, the same mundane physical being that you were when you were born. Nothing more, nothing less than that. So therefore we say, Katshedu mitzvosecha. Shabbos and Yom Tov are days of mercy. That although we're unworthy and we don't meet the grade that our mitzvahs should be accepted and embraced by God, but due to this exceptional level and time of mercy at this moment, allow the mitzvah to sanctify us. Katshedu mitzvosecha. Allow us to be sanctified. Accept the mitzvah. Let that be the catalyst. And once it becomes the catalyst, what do we become? We become an entity of holiness. As an entity of holiness, we become an appropriate repository for the Torah to be placed into that. Because we are the domicile, we're the repository for that Torah. So if the person himself becomes an entity of holiness, then it's appropriate that the Torah, which was given to us at Sinai and taught us in utero, should be able to be retrieved to go into that repository. Because that repository has been sanctified through the performance of the mitzvos. Because we linked and connected at many levels. And that's the request on Shabbos and Yom Tov. Katshenu mitzvosecha. Sanctify us with the mitzvos. Once we're sanctified, we become an appropriate repository. Now that with appropriate repository, allow us to retrieve our portion that was given to us at Sinai and taught us in utero by the angel, to be able to extract it and to store it in that appropriate repository, which was sanctified through the performance of the mitzvos.